Welcome to Weather Extra. Meteorologist Jillian Grace. Thanks for joining us today. Wednesday, April 12th marked the 1-year anniversary of the powerful and devastating high-end EF3 tornado that hit near Salado, leaving absolute destruction in its path. The tornado was on the ground for 13 miles, had maximum winds of 165 miles per hour, only 1 mile per hour shy of becoming an EF4. Dozens of people were injured, many properties flattened along the way. This edition of Weather Extra will focus on the stories of those impacted. Before we get to those stories, we get things started with meteorologist Sean Bellafiore, who joins us now with more on the path the tornado took and why much of Salado was spared. Sean.
Spared may be the understatement of the century with this tornado because it was making a beeline right for Salado. And vividly, I can remember this day. The environment that the tornado formed in was one that supported both long track and violent tornadoes. So this tornado could have been going a lot longer than it actually was. It was on the ground for about 13 miles, and notice the path taking it almost directly towards Salado, taking it directly towards I-35 before a sharp north turn towards Stillhouse Hollow Lake, and it was that sharp turn that spared Salado from a direct impact from an EF3 tornado with 165 mile per hour winds. You're taking a look at radar right now from that day, and if you know anything about radar and tornadoes, you can clearly see a couple of different features, including the supercell thunderstorm that moved its way directly over Salado, but also you can clearly tell where the debris ball is, and we're going to take a dive into this storm itself. Now, just a little bit before 5:30 is when we started to see the signs that this was going to be producing a tornado, and right there's the debris ball from this tornado as it started just on the other side of the Bell-Williamson County line. Fortunately, this tornado formed very close to the radar site, just a couple of dozen miles away to the southeast, so we were able to get a very good look at the storm during its entire lifespan. And it's right at this point, about 5:47 in the afternoon, that you can clearly see the debris ball on radar. This is when the tornado was at its strongest, but I want to point out, look at these storms off to the south. Those storms moved from the south right into the storm, which helped to push that tornado away from Salado, kept it from crossing over I-35, and caused it to dissipate right when it got to Stillhouse Hollow Lake. And taking a little bit of a closer look, there is that debris ball right there. You can see it clearly showing up. FM 2843, Hidden Spring Drives right before Salado, and then taking a big turn to the north. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafiore, KWTX News 10.
She just kind of rolled over and cried. She told me that she thought her daughter was dead.
Nearly 24 people were injured during last year's tornado, but the story of the Rios family resonated most with so many of you. You just heard from their cousin, who talked with KWTX last year, telling us about the unimaginable ordeal of how the entire family was uprooted from their home, their baby thrown into a nearby field, and their 6-year-old wedged in the branches of a tree. But for the first time since the tornado, the family shares their story exclusively with our Rosamond Crown, who met up with the family in Salado this past Wednesday. Rosamond.
Yeah, this is where the Rios family's mobile home once stood, and this is where everything changed for them on that fateful Tuesday in April last year. And while the rubble still remains, their hope has been lifted.
It actually started off a day like this, you know, it was sunny and everything.
A literal walk down memory lane for the Rios family as they revisit what was once their safe place, their home.
Before we knew it, we seen a tornado go up, and I grabbed my kids and held them in my arms.
But even the arms of Mom Vanessa Rios was not a safe place for her kids.
We were just up in the air with the kids, and my son, he flew out of my arms, and then she started to slide out of my arms. So she had long hair at the time, and I just grabbed her hair and I just held on.
I said, "Mommy, let's all start praying to the Lord."
That's Miriam Rios, 6 years old at the time. The tornado wedged her in the branches of a tree, flung her 1-year-old baby brother Ezra somewhere in a field, her dad thrown elsewhere with his pelvis broken, and her mom partially paralyzed and miscarried a pregnancy, a baby boy they would have named Dakota.
Dakota Liam Rios. My husband says we all died that day, and it feels that way too, because It's like we don't remember who we were.
But what this family does remember is the months they spent in hospitals and physical therapy to treat the physical wounds.
When I went to rehab, they made me get up and get in a wheelchair.
But the emotional wounds still linger with the slightest weather change.
I feel sometimes when it's like probably rain and hard storms, I feel scared, I feel nervous.
A 365-day journey has brought them here, finding joy in the devastation.
Mommy, it's one of my dolls.
And showing gratitude to God.
God saved us, God healed us.
Thanks to the generosity of people here in Central Texas and across the country, the Rioses have been able to buy a new mobile home. But with the trauma of what happened here on this land, they say they're looking for a new place to put it and call home. In Salado, Rosamond Crown, KWTX News 10.
And on to another survivor's story. It's been a year of rebuilding and remembering for Misty Slack and her family. They had been living in Salado for over 15 years when they lost everything in last year's tornado. A year later, she reflects on how it has changed their lives. News 10 Chantel Robb spoke with Misty and shares her story with us.
It's something I never ever want to go through again.
The home you see behind Salado resident Misty Slack here didn't look like this a year ago. This footage from Slack's phone was taken just moments before a devastating EF3 tornado ripped through her mobile home.
Hurry up, take cover! By the time I got to the front door and opened it, it was right there, and debris were flying, and a tree limb actually came through my front door, and I just took off running.
Slack says after hearing that tree come through the front door, she, her husband, and 12-year-old son took shelter in her closet, holding hands and praying together as 165 miles per hour winds forced walls to topple around them.
When it was over, the wall was on top of us, and I guess it was the adrenaline going through us that we were able to get off and make our way down to the gravel area, and we just started finding shoes to put on. We had no shoes, no nothing on.
It wasn't just shoes Slack no longer had. Nothing but rubble and debris was left of her family's home, which meant months of rebuilding were in store. She and her husband Jose made a goal to move into a finished home by September of 2022, and with months of hard work, they did it.
We worked really, really hard to make sure that our son has some kind of normalcy and stuff, and to make sure that we had a home again. So it's been a lot.
This didn't come without sacrifice, though.
We were not able financially to get a storm shelter, which we promised our son we would if we came back. But we had to make some choices on whether we get a storm shelter or we get a home.
And while the home is livable, the work isn't done.
We're almost complete with rocking it in.
The Salado mother says the traumatic event changed her life forever, but amidst it all, she still feels blessed.
We're here for whatever reason. God made sure everybody here on Buttermilk Lane was okay and was protected, and I feel like we owe it to our son to keep moving forward and just building the best life that we can have.
Straight ahead on Weather Extra is this week's Degrees of Science with the Chief Meteorologist Brady Taylor and myself. We had the chance to speak with a junior at Salado High School that made a documentary about one family whose home was destroyed by the storm while their youngest son was in the house. That interview is coming up right after the break. We have some very special guests with us joining us in studio today, Kirby and Mr. Cook. You guys live in the Salado area and actually came out with a documentary. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but I want to start it off with you, Brady. You worked that event.
Yeah.
Can you just explain what that day was like?
Yes, we had two major tornadoes touch down that day. The first one was on Fort Hood. It actually went across area where they had a fire earlier in the year, so we never knew how much damage it did. The second one, which y'all focused on in the documentary form, just out west of Salado, was an EF3 tornado. Did a lot of damage for that storm. Major storm. Strongest storm in Bell County since the Gerald tornado of 1997.
And then what was it like for you guys living in Salado? Were you guys worried about the weather? Did you have any clue what was coming your way that day?
I'm terrified of tornadoes. So we took shelter at the middle school, and we didn't know where it was. And then once we got home, we still didn't know, but it was in the back of my neighborhood. So I was even more terrified. But
yeah, and then what about you, Mr. Cook?
I went home and I was watching Brady broadcast, and then that's when I saw the ineptness of the whole documentary of like texting with his friends.
Yeah, so if folks hadn't seen, the day of the storm when I'm on the green wall working, I've got my phone sitting there, and my wife was texting me with another friend at Salado and kept saying, I just got these random snippets of house got hit, somebody got hurt, that kind of stuff. And it's the only time I've ever had to stop on air and be like, oh my goodness, what's going on kind of thing.
Yeah, and so you guys decided to make a documentary about this. What made you want to make this and really capture that day?
You have to have an idea for your state film, and we had a few ideas, but nobody was really reaching back to us. And so the tornado had just happened, and we kind of were like, well, that's, you know, popular and hits close to home. So we emailed Brady Taylor about it, and he helped us with it.
And y'all did an amazing job on it. You know, was it already? Did y'all plan to go down that storyline that y'all ended up with when y'all came to talk to me, or did that evolve down the line?
No, once you had mentioned the Light family, we were like, oh, we can get them as well. So it kind of evolved.
That worked well, yeah.
What is it like being able to help your students capture this documentary? What does it mean to you as a teacher?
This is the best group of film students I've ever had, the most creative. My class won first and second at state.
Wow.
But it's really special, like Kirby here, I've known this family for over 15 years, so I told the family I would get their film, get a child to state at some point. This is the one we're going to get there.
Really
so Kirby, you know, 7-minute long documentary, how much time do you think you spent working on that documentary to get it ready?
Oh,
lots of hours, I'm guessing.
Yeah, months. It was a lot. I don't even know. It was months though.
Yeah, but hey, the product, it turned out great, and I remember when Brady showed me it, I was just blown away, because for high school, also the equipment that you guys have, just the product that you put out, it was awesome.
Yeah, I think y'all did an amazing job catching the emotion of that day, because you know, I always joke with the Light family that y'all had a lot of prayers from people that never had seen it, and I mean, it gave me goosebumps rewatching it.
And we actually have that special documentary here to show you guys. Make sure you stay tuned. That documentary coming up right after this.
This was one where I could feel deep down in my heart, this could be a bad one. This is one that, you know, is going to cause injuries and hopefully not deaths, but something that if it continues on the track and the strength, that this could be a historic storm that we talk about for a long time. What happened was, in both of the storms that produced tornadoes had this happening, and it's a very rare thing in Central Texas. We actually had storms formed to the south of it that got pulled in. And as it did, it pretty much sucked that tornado into the thunderstorm and did an abrupt left-hand turn and ended up going straight up to Stillhouse Hollow Lake. But it made it to about 5 miles away from Salado High School when it made the turn. It was on the ground for about 13 miles, but if it would have stayed on the ground, unfortunately, the casualty count would have probably been a lot more significant than what we had. I mean, the damage was catastrophic where it occurred, but it avoided any major metropolitan areas that could have caused a lot more issues. The last time we had an EF3 tornado was the day of the Gerald tornado. So that storm, the Gerald tornado, when it was moving south through this part, heading towards Prairie Dale and eventually Gerald, was in a strengthening phase. So it didn't become an F5 tornado until it crossed the county line. One, it's rare for us to see storms that strong. Two, for it to be on the ground for 13 miles is pretty rare as well. And a lot of tornadoes that we see in Central Texas are wrapped in rain, meaning there's a lot of precipitation, we can't see it. This was a very different storm, as people here in town could see the storm miles away as it was approaching, and that's pretty rare when it comes to tornadoes in Central Texas as well. So that was something we were tracking and seeing, but it was your very prototypical monster thunderstorm. I can remember tracking in that day, seeing the setup of it, that it was something that we knew was going to be very bad. I started getting text messages, and I can't read them all. It's just if I happen to see it pop up. Well, my wife was texting with a family friend of ours that lives in Salado that my son's played baseball with forever, and I start getting texts. Oh, no. Oh, I just found out some of our friends' house got destroyed with this, so they live down in that area. All I see is the house is gone. The kid's name, he was in the house by himself. I see that. And then I see the next text, he's bloody. Then I see another text, they're taking him in the ambulance. Get through there, and then I'm getting reports of homes being, the text I got was their home is gone. I'm just gonna, I wanna make sure that family is safe. You know, your job is to tell people what's going on, but when it gets personal, it gets really hard. And it's the first time I've ever had to just take a step back for a second and just tell the viewers, look, this is what's going on. And I was joking with him and his family afterwards. I was like, y'all had a lot of prayers from people that had no clue who you were, worried about you from what they saw of me covering it on TV.
Our family's been pretty close with Brady Taylor and his family for several years. We've been playing travel baseball with his son. Him and Garrett were on the same team, so we spent a lot of times joking together in the stands and hanging out, and we talked quite a bit, stayed in hotels together. It was an every weekend thing. We were pretty much with that family, so we were very close.
So we're at our older son's baseball game here in town at the high school, and the game had gone into lightning delay, and there was a tornado in the area. So we got on the phone, reached out to Garrett. Thankfully, the phone call went through to him. Let him know to go ahead and get in the bathtub, take shelter, do not leave till you hear from us. At which point, I got out of the car, looked back that direction, which is about probably 10 miles away, saw the tornado beginning to form. So I went ahead and I jumped in the car and started heading his direction to try to beat the tornado there. Essentially, I didn't want him to be alone.
My dad was on his way as it hit because he was at my brother's baseball game and he saw it funnel down. So he was coming down our road.
I knew it was a bad storm. Brady's wife had been texting me, telling me that I needed to get somewhere. I didn't want to leave Jace, alone at the game. So I didn't know what to do. But when he left and I looked down and saw his phone and I knew I couldn't get a hold of anybody, I was just very scared.
And as I'm racing to get there, I passed several cars coming the other direction, honking, flashing their lights, trying to wave me down. And obviously I see it, I know what I'm going into, but it didn't matter. I had to get there.
Whenever my dad got there, there was already police there. So he just put his truck in park and he started running down the road. And once he saw me, he just came and gave me a hug. My mom came afterwards, like an hour or two later, and I could just see her walking down the night.
When he left and I looked down and saw his phone and I knew I couldn't get a hold of anybody, I was just very scared. I knew that could potentially, when I told him I love you, be safe, might have been the last thing I ever said to him.
Lord, in the eye of the storm, I know you're watching me, yeah.
Welcome back to Weather Extra. The Salado tornado event was significant enough that Governor Abbott made multiple visits to the area. He first came just days after the tornado hit to survey the damage. He spoke about providing necessary aid to the area and met with victims of the storm. At the time, he also met with local first responders and elected officials. The governor returned to the area just a few weeks ago to dedicate one of the two churches rebuilt from ruin.
Because your foundation was stronger than anything that nature could throw at you, a strength that can only come from God.
Cedar Valley Baptist Church and Victory Baptist have both been rebuilt and have been able to hold services to bring the community back together. Here at KWTX, in partnership with the Waco Foundation and Helping Hands Ministries, created the Central Texas Tornado Relief Fund for those impacted by last year's tornado. News 10's Josh Bowering visited a home that was left uninhabitable after the twister tore through. But with the help of the community and the Central Texas Tornado Relief Fund, she's back on her feet. Take a look.
And I said, well, do we have to find a place to sleep tonight? She said, yes, Mom, we're gonna all have to find a place to sleep.
1 year ago, Whit's world was turned upside down. This is what her home looked like after that EF3 tornado visited her property. Debris scattered across the yard and sunshine coming through the roof.
I drove up and I couldn't believe what I saw. And I started to sob.
Like many families, Whit lost most of her belongings. To help get her back on her feet, Helping Hands Ministries came in with large dumpsters and hauled load after load off of her property. The nonprofit also helped restore running water with new charcoal and water softener filters.
I can live without a water softener, but the charcoal filter I can't live without.
Nearing the light at the end of the tunnel, Whit made sure to thank the folks that made it happen.
They were such a tremendous blessing to me, and I knew none of them but one lady from years ago, and they were so gracious to help us.
For Helping Hands, they say it's what they do best, distributing $63,000 in aid.
It's the fun part now of just hearing their stories and them seeing, the blessing that came out of such a loss and a hard time.
What a year it has been for those impacted by this tornado. We're very grateful at KWTX for those who have shared their stories with us. That's all we have for you for this week's episode of Weather Extra. Tune in again next weekend for another half hour of weather and science. See you next time.